Hello everyone. Thank you all for being here today. As Steven said, my name is Max Sabo. I'm a senior here, in case you don't know me. I've spent the past few months working on this project, which I call A Decade for the Ages. Now over the next hour, more or less, I'll be sharing the story of how I got here, why this project matters to me, and what those words on the screen behind me really mean. Now, all I ask is for your attention, and I'm going to do everything I can to make it worth your while. Now, there are a lot of important issues in this world. And although they are all extremely important and they all need to be acted on, I'm here to focus on just one very relevant, very big issue. Much bigger than any individual in this room, much bigger than you, much bigger than me, much bigger than little central Vermont, which we call home. I'm here to talk about climate change. Now, one of the more frustrating parts about talking about climate change is that it's often ignored as a relevant issue, especially here in big oil countries like the United States. I think that this is the main reason why there has been so little climate action over the past 15 to 20 years. And I think it's the main barrier for forward progress. Now, I just wanted to preface that I'm not here to try and tell anyone that the way they view this issue is wrong. And I'm not here to talk about specific political figures and where they fall. I'm just here as a fellow member of U32 High School who has done a lot of research on climate change. And I want to share with you what I've learned and hopefully be able to outline this global situation. Because as a human on this planet, you deserve to know what's going on. So I guess a good place to start would be sharing that there is an overwhelming scientific consensus that our planet is warming at an alarming rate and that it's due to human activity. Essentially, global warming is happening and it's our fault. I wouldn't be standing here today even talking about climate change if there wasn't such glaring scientific proof. And the excuse of not having this scientific evidence of climate change has been out the window for a while now. So here's where we are. Climate change is proven to be happening. There are a lot of things that need to be done to help this crisis, and they have to get done fast. Essentially, I'm going to touch on all this later, but essentially the situation is desperate. However, I wouldn't even bother doing this if I didn't have hope. Because although things aren't looking too great at the moment, I'm still hopeful that we as a global community can get our act together and that we can do it in time. But first, let me slow down, and I'm going to begin with some background information. When I was a sophomore here at U32, my dad introduced me to a short film, and it was made by 350.org, and he took the time to paraphrase what was being said so that I could understand it better. This film was called Do the Math, and it focuses on the studies of an American environmentalist named Bill McKibben. And what he does is he really just narrates the story of global warming, but he decides to focus on how terrifying the numbers, the statistics really are. So I'm going to actually show you a little bit of it today. But before I get into it, I just want to throw out there, since I will be touching on this later, this film was made 6 years ago. It was made back in 2013. And as I'm sure you could have guessed, the numbers have changed since then. But like I said, more on that later. So, without further ado, here's a little bit of Do the Math.
Well, thank you all. Thank you all so much for being here today. It is a great It is a great pleasure for me to get to be here tonight. And one of the gifts for me of these last few months was getting, tiring though it was in a sense, to travel around the country. And one of the things that was great was just being reminded what an incredibly beautiful place this is. You know, we got to Denver and it was gorgeous, but the air was full of smoke from fires still burning in December after the biggest fire season ever. And we got through those gorgeous farmland, much of it still, 60% of it still in a federally declared drought. But it's also worth just saying that it's a terrible thing to take a world this beautiful and for the sake of outsized profits for a few people for a little while, lay it to waste. Tonight's the start of the last campaign I may really get to fight, not because I'm getting tired, but because the planet's getting tired. In the world that we've built, where our institutions aren't working the way they should, we have to do more than we should. That news doesn't depress me. In a sense, it excites me because I think we know what we need to do. I think we've peeled away the layers of the onion. We've gotten to the very heart of things. As of tonight, we're taking on the fossil fuel industry directly. The moment has come that we have to make real stands. We're reaching limits. The biggest limit that we're running into may be that we're running out of atmosphere into which to put the waste products of our society, particularly the carbon dioxide that's the ubiquitous byproduct of burning fossil fuel. You burn coal or oil or gas, you get CO2, and the atmosphere.
So essentially, there is a greenhouse effect. We burn coal, we burn oil, we burn gas, and this creates many byproducts, including large amounts of the greenhouse gas, which we call carbon dioxide. Now, when the sun shines down on the earth, some light is then re-radiated as infrared heat waves. But it's caught in our atmosphere by this carbon dioxide, methane, all these other greenhouse gases that are just sitting up there. So that means that when we add more greenhouse gases to the mix, more heat is captured. And this is what's causing global warming. We're polluting our atmosphere, and the Earth's climate is getting hotter and hotter because of it.
We know what the solutions for dealing with this trouble are. Many of the technologies we need to get off fossil fuel and onto something else. The thing that's preventing us from doing it is the enormous political power wielded by those who have made and are making vast windfall profits off of fossil fuel.
The data has been out for years now, proving that global warming is happening. But we also have learned of these potential solutions. Some of these solutions include solar panels, which convert sunlight into a usable energy source. Wind turbines, which convert wind into a usable energy source. Electric vehicles, which reduce carbon emissions by using electric power sources. Weatherizing our homes, reducing methane pollution by keeping food out of the landfill, imposing a carbon tax, and there are many more. However, it's nearly impossible for these to have a serious effect on climate change when, firstly, these solutions aren't being implemented on a big enough scale, nationally, internationally. And two, our government continues to back the multi-trillion-dollar fossil fuel industry with taxpayer dollars. Last year, here in the US, we gave the fossil fuel industry over $20 billion. That's 3 times more than what we gave solar, wind, and biomass combined. Now imagine if that money was given to the scientists that are developing these renewable energy technologies, these greener alternatives. As Bill McKibben is trying to convey here, there are a few extremely powerful individuals that are running the fossil fuel industry who are making more money than they could ever need, and all the while jeopardizing the future of our children, our grandchildren, and everyone to come after us.
Well, there have been a lot of efforts by scientists to try to estimate whether we are living sustainably in the sense of whether we're consuming planetary resources at a rate that can be continued. The threat that this combination of climate change, water shortages, food shortages, and rising energy prices is enormously troubling to anybody who's aware of the data and the way these issues could play out.
You can't keep increasing your economy infinitely on a finite planet. One of the things that humanity is facing is the need to dramatically reduce its carbon footprint over the next 40 years. And we're talking in the wealthy countries about 80 to 90% reductions.
We're no longer at the point of trying to stop global warming, too late for that. We're at the point of trying to keep it from becoming a complete and utter calamity. We shouldn't have to be here tonight. If the world worked in a kind of rational way, we shouldn't have to be here. 25 years ago, our scientists started telling us about climate change. I played my small role in that by writing the first book about all this in 1989 for a general audience, a book called The End of Nature. If the world worked as it should, our leaders would have heeded those warnings, gone to work, done the sensible things that at the time would have been enough to get us a long way where we needed to go. They didn't, and that's why we're in the fix we're in.
This is the biggest emergency the human family has faced since it came out of the caves. There is nothing bigger.
All these issues matter, immigration and healthcare and education, but this one is really about the physical change of the planet.
We all have been saying we need to save the planet. But as I think about it, the planet's going to be around for some time to come. What's at stake now is civilization itself.
Our most important climatologist, Jim Hansen, had his team at NASA do a study to figure out how much carbon in the atmosphere was too much. The paper they published, maybe the most important scientific paper of the millennia to date, said we now know enough to know how much is too much. Any value for carbon in the atmosphere greater than 350 parts per million is not compatible with the planet on which civilization developed and to which life on Earth is adapted. That's pretty strong language for scientists to use. Stronger still if you know that outside today, the atmosphere is 395 parts per million CO2 and rising about 2 parts per million per year. Everything frozen on Earth is melting. The great ice sheet of the Arctic is reduced by more than half. The oceans are about 30% more acidic than they were 30 years ago because the chemistry of seawater changes as it absorbs carbon from the atmosphere. And because warm air holds more water vapor than cold, the atmosphere is about 5% wetter than it was 40 years ago. That's astonishingly large change.
There's more energy coming in and being absorbed by the Earth than there is heat being radiated to space, which is exactly what we expected, because as we add greenhouse gases to the atmosphere, it traps heat. Now we can measure that, and that's the basis by which we can prove that the human-made impacts on atmospheric composition are the primary cause of the climate change that we're observing.
So let's get to work. We're calling this Do the Math, and we're going to do some math for a moment. Just 3 numbers, okay? I wrote about them in a piece last summer for Rolling Stone, a piece that went oddly viral. It was the issue with Justin Bieber on the cover, okay? But here's the strange thing. The next day, I got a call from the editor saying, your piece has gotten 10 times more likes on Facebook than Justin Bieber's, you know? Some of that is doubtless the result of my sort of soulful stare, you know? But mostly it's because we managed to just kind of lay out this math in a very straightforward way that people needed to understand as we were going through what turned out to be the hottest year that America has ever experienced. Before we get to those three numbers, here's where we are so far. We've burned enough coal and gas and oil to raise the temperature of the Earth 1 degree. What has that done? There was a day last September when the headline in the paper was, half the polar ice cap is missing. Literally. I mean, if Neil Armstrong were up on the moon today, he would look down and see half as much area of ice in the Arctic. We've taken one of the largest physical features on Earth and we have broken it. Shall we work through the numbers? They're three, and they're easy. The first one's 2 degrees. That's how much the world has said it would be safe to let the planet warm. In political terms, it's the only thing that anybody's agreed to. Some of you may remember that climate summit in Copenhagen. There was only one number in the final 2-page voluntary accord that people signed. Only one number in it, 2 degrees. Every signatory pledged to make sure the temperature wouldn't rise above that. The EU, Japan, Russia, China, countries that make their money selling oil like the United Arab Emirates, the most conservative, recalcitrant, reluctant countries on Earth, even the United States. If the world officially believes anything about climate change, it's that 2 degrees is too much. Second number, scientists have calculated how much carbon we could pour into the atmosphere and have a reasonable chance of staying below 2 degrees. They say about 565 more gigatons. A gigaton is 1 billion tons. That's not a perfect chance. That's worse odds than Russian roulette, you know. It sounds like it should be a lot. It is a lot. 565 billion tons of CO2. The problem is we pour 30 billion tons a year in now, and it goes up 3% a year. Do the math, and it's about 15 years before we go past that threshold. So that's sobering news. But the scary number is the third number. The third number was the important one and the new one, and it came from a team of financial analysts in the United Kingdom. And what they did was sit down with all the annual reports and SEC filings and things and figure out how much carbon the world's fossil fuel industry, how much they had already in their reserves. And that number turned out to be 2,795 gigatons worth of carbon. 5 times as much as the most conservative governments on Earth think would be safe to pour into the atmosphere. It's not even close. I mean, it's 5 times more. And once you know that number, then you understand the essence of this problem.
So, we have 3 numbers here. Let's start by just looking at the first 2 numbers again. These are measurements of how much our planet can endure, essentially. As in, we cannot take more than 2 degrees Celsius increase in our global temperature. Although, most experts say we really should keep that below 1.5 degrees Celsius increase. But 2 degrees is what all of the most conservative, oil-rich nations could agree on, and so we'll go with that. And then secondly, we can endure about 565 more gigatons of carbon dioxide being pumped into our atmosphere. If we exceed these numbers, we're in big trouble. And then, as Bill mentioned, there's that last number. That's the really scary number, the 2795, that's 2,795 gigatons of carbon dioxide that the fossil fuel industry can create with what they already have in their reserves. Essentially, we've had this gun pointed at us for years now. But with this new number, we can see that the gun is loaded. The fossil fuel industry has enough carbon in their reserves to put us almost 5 times over the mark that we can take. Now, in my opinion, there's nothing more scary than that. The fossil fuel industry has 5 times more oil than we can burn, and the thing is, nothing's going to stop them from burning it unless we can create the political will to stop consuming the fossil fuels and stop giving them $20 billion in subsidies each year. That 2,795, that is the number that I saw 2 years ago that woke me up to what is happening and made me realize that we need a global call to action, or else we're all screwed.
What the fossil fuel industry is doing is locking us into a future that we can't survive, that humanity cannot survive. And we know this because just at the end of 2012, we heard this from 3 different conservative sources simultaneously. The World Bank, the International Energy Agency, PricewaterhouseCoopers, hardly a hippie outfit, all told us that if we do nothing but more of the same, if we dig up those reserves, we are headed towards 4 to 6 degrees warming Celsius.
These numbers show, and I want to be absolutely clear here, these companies are a rogue force. They're outlaws. They're not outlaws against the laws of the state. They get to write those for the most part. But they're outlaw against the laws of physics. If they carry out their business plan, the planet tanks. And we have all the engineers and entrepreneurs we need. The thing that's holding us back above all else is the simple fact that the fossil fuel industry cheats. Alone among industries, they're allowed to pour out their waste for free.
Nobody should be able to pollute for free. You can't, I can't, we can't walk out of here and go litter for free. If you do, you get a fine. If you run a small business, you can't just dump all the garbage in the road. You gotta pay to have it hauled away or you get a fine. The only people who can pollute for free are these mega polluters when it comes to carbon. Big oil, big coal. If you get a $25 fine for littering, you're gonna pay $25 more than all of the industrial polluters have ever paid in 150 years for the carbon they've been dumping. That's how whack this whole thing is.
It's almost how we define civilization. You pick up after yourself, unless you're the fossil fuel industry, then you pour that carbon into the atmosphere for free, and that is the advantage that keeps us from getting renewable energy at the pace that we need. We should internalize that externality. The only reason we haven't is because it would impair somewhat the record profitability of the fossil fuel industry, and so they have battled at every turn to keep it from happening. These are rogue companies now.
So you hear that? If you pay $25 for a fine for littering, you're paying $25 more than the entire fossil fuel industry has ever paid for all the carbon they've been dumping. Like Bill McKibben said, everyone has to follow the same rules about picking up after themselves, unless you're the fossil fuel industry, in which case you put that carbon wherever you want. Doesn't seem fair. Thank you all for your patience and your attention so far. That was a little taste of Do the Math for you. I highly recommend you go check it out on YouTube. It's about 45 minutes long. But now I want to bring us back to the present, because a lot has changed in the 6 years since that came out. First, I'd like to bring us back to the number 350, which happens to be the name of Bill McKibben's organization, which indicates the amount in parts per million of CO2 that we can contain in our atmosphere safely. Exceeding that number would be, as we heard earlier, not compatible with the planet on which civilization developed and to which life on Earth is adapted. Now take a look at that just for a second. This quote, pulled straight from a NASA study, shows us where our line is. That is where 350.org came from. It has been known for a while now that it is essential that we keep our carbon emissions below that number. But as of last month, March 2019, we are at about 412 parts per million CO2 in the atmosphere. Now that's an increase from last year, just as it has been on a continuous increase each year over the past century. As you can see, it just keeps going up. We've already exceeded the 350 mark by a bit. Not good. Now let's bring it back to the 2 degrees Celsius. That's the amount of heating up, essentially, that our world leaders have agreed our planet can take. This graph shows how, although we have not hit the 2-degree increase mark just yet, the planet is getting hotter, and in fact, the past 5 years have been the hottest 5 years in the history of planet Earth. And I want to mention as well, in case there are any doubts, that these graphs and tables are straight from the NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. They're not fake. Unfortunately, they're very much real. Oh yeah, there's a little climate change meme for you guys. A little Bon Jovi collab. Anyways, moving on. So now, I would like to bring your attention to Volume 2 of the National Climate Assessment. This is a 1,656-page assessment. It's an absolute unit. I've tried looking at it a couple times. It's a lot to take in. Anyway, it covers everything from last year's climate numbers to the devastating effects it's had on our environment and on our economy. I'm not going to get into all the little details. They get quite boring. I'm going to jump to one little article of information that I find to be extremely terrifying. For a while now, scientists have been saying that we have really until the end of the century to try and cut our emissions. Then they said 50 years. Then many people started to want 30-year action plans. But now, we have 12 years to get our act together. This report showed us that with the rate our planet is warming right now, with the rate we are increasingly pumping more and more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, we have 12 years until we're breaching all thresholds. Until we are out of time. There's no wiggle room to stop lasting climate consequences. Like I said earlier, we'd be screwed. Now, to clarify what that means, I'm not talking about the Earth exploding or anything, rather a point of no return, where the polar ice caps will have nearly completely melted, which causes our sea levels to rise. We will suffer increasingly common and increasingly extreme hurricanes, tornadoes, droughts, floods. We're talking the downfall of a planet on which civilization can survive. And another main reason why many people choose to put this issue in the back of their mind is because they think, hey, Vermont just had a pretty cold winter. There's truth to that. We just had a winter with temperatures that are quite typical for Vermont. But meanwhile, Australia had its hottest year on record, with temperatures around the continent of about 120 degrees Fahrenheit. So when you think about global warming, it's an average of these global temperatures, including Vermont, including Australia. So take a look at this little infographic right here. As you can see, the overall trend of global temperature percentiles is vastly pink or darker pink, which means it's getting warmer. This is January 2019. Like I said earlier, Global warming is much bigger than our little central Vermont bubble. We are lucky not to be a frontline community in this global crisis. Because when I'm talking 12 years until it's too late, that too late isn't going to hit us first. But meanwhile, things aren't looking too bright for wildlife in Antarctica, let's say. Or small towns in the outskirts of Bangladesh that are expected to be completely covered in water by 2030. And each year that we don't act, the surface temps of our oceans will continue to heat up and feed tropical storms and hurricanes. Like Hurricane Harvey in Texas, or Maria in Puerto Rico. Our warming climate is causing hotter and drier air in forests, which are leading to more wildfires every year, as I'm sure you've seen in the news. And also in the news just the other day, we're hearing about an iceberg twice the size of New York City that is set to break off an ice shelf in Antarctica. This is a bird's eye view. That's the crack. And as the entire world is changing more rapidly each year, the consequences of this climate catastrophe will eventually reach every corner of the globe. And with the recent warnings from the UN, we can see that we have about a decade to preserve the future of all living beings on this planet. A decade for the ages. Now that I've outlined this issue and where we stand today, I want to talk about what can be done. And I don't think there's a better person to help me with this than Greta Thunberg. She is a 16-year-old girl from Sweden, and she's become a climate activist and leader over the past year. So I'm going to show you guys her first big speech, which she made in front of our world leaders at the UN Climate Change Conference in Poland last year. Take a look.
My name is Greta Thunberg. I am 15 years old and I'm from Sweden. I speak on behalf of Climate Justice Now. Many people say that Sweden is just a small country and it doesn't matter what we do. But I've learned that you are never too small to make a difference. And if a few children can get headlines all over the world just by not going to school, then imagine what we could all do together if we really wanted to. But to do that, we have to speak clearly, no matter how uncomfortable that may be. You only speak of green, eternal economic growth because you are too scared of being unpopular. You only talk about moving forward with the same bad ideas that got us into this mess, even when the only sensible thing to do is pull the emergency brake. You are not mature enough to tell it like it is. Even that burden you leave to us children. But I don't care about being popular. I care about climate justice and a living planet. Our civilization is being sacrificed for the opportunity of a very small number of people to continue making enormous amounts of money. Our biosphere is being sacrificed so that rich people in countries like mine can live in luxury. It is the sufferings of the many which pay for the luxuries of the few. The year 2078, I will celebrate my 75th birthday. If I have children, maybe they will spend that day with me. Maybe they will ask me about you. Maybe they will ask why you didn't do anything while there still was time to act. You say you love your children above all else, and yet you are stealing their future in front of their very eyes. Until you start focusing on what needs to be done, rather than what is politically possible, there is no hope. We cannot solve a crisis without treating it as a crisis. We need to keep the fossil fuels in the ground, and we need to focus on equity. And if solutions within this system are so impossible to find, then maybe we should change the system itself. We have not come here to beg world leaders to care. You have ignored us in the past, and you will ignore us again. We have run out of excuses, and we are running out of time. We have come here to let you know that change is coming, whether you like it or not. The real power belongs to the people. Thank you.
Greta basically stood up in front of some of the most powerful elected officials on the planet and called them out for not doing enough when it comes to climate change. She said it like it is. We're running out of time, and we need to get over whatever is stopping us from acting, be it pride, ignorance, and do something before it's too late. All these powerful world leaders, they always talk about their love for their nation, their love for their family, and yet they're letting both down when they choose not to act on environmental issues. And if they all got their priorities in line and focused on climate action, we could make incredible forward progress in a really fast amount of time. JFK told us we were going to put a man on the moon in 10 years. At the time, we had never even put someone in orbit. We did it in 9. We created the political will to get it done, and it happened. That's the same type of mentality that we need today from our world leaders on climate change. As Betsy Taylor, founder of A New Dream, mentioned earlier in Do the Math, all these issues matter. Immigration, healthcare, education. But this one's about the physical change of the planet. There is nothing more important than this. And we're seeing every year how the stakes are getting higher. As a global community, our leaders are not prioritizing climate change. They're not passing the bold, comprehensive climate legislation that we need. And these mega polluters in the fossil fuel industry are having their way with destroying our Earth. And we can't continue to let them do that. As I look at it, it is truly a colossal injustice to any inhabitant of this Earth. And so all I ask from you today is to look at everything I've shared with you with an open mind, and to try to really understand the reality of the global situation right now, as scary and overwhelming as it is, and see where you fall. Because there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and whether you decide to go out today and start campaigning against the fossil fuel industry, or just decide to change a few things about your life, there's always something you can do. For me, I'm a part of the Vermont Youth Lobby, where I work with an amazing group of people, including kids that go to this school and many other schools across Vermont. I help organize events. I speak at press conferences at the State House. I meet and talk with my legislators, with our legislators. I'm also a member of the Green Team here at U32, where we work to brainstorm different ways that we can positively impact the environment and lower our carbon footprint within the school. And at my home, we compost, recycle, try to buy as much locally sourced produce as possible. We've owned 4 hybrid electric vehicles throughout my lifetime. So whether it's small scale or big, there are a lot of things that you can do. You can get involved with Green Team, Youth Lobby, change little things to create a more eco-friendly lifestyle, or even just spread awareness to your family, your friends, others around you, similar to what I have done today, which costs absolutely no money whatsoever, and it makes all the difference. Now the clock is ticking down, and we need the masses to stand up and work together to protect life on Earth for all those to come after us. And whatever your part in it may be, I just hope that you see how dangerous the consequences will be if we don't act now. We have about a decade to preserve our planet for all life forms, for all eternity. There is not enough being done. And as the youth of this nation and of this planet, it is our time to stand up and make the change that we want to see, the change that we need. So I hope you all enjoyed this presentation and that you go make the most out of the breakout rooms next week. But more importantly, I just hope that you decide to join us in this fight and get to participate in the movement that saves civilization as we know it. Thank you.